Namaste, everyone. Welcome back. I could not be more thrilled to bring you this incredible interview with my dear friend and one of my very best friends in the world, Seane Corn, on her new book, Revolution of the Soul, which has just been published by Sounds True. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I'm so happy to see you. I just want to reach through the screen and just like grab your face and just kiss you all up. Yeah.
I know we could jam forever, like full girlfriend style. I know that most of you really know exactly who Seane is, but I'm just going to give you a brief introduction for any of you that might be living under a rock in the yoga world. Seane is an internationally acclaimed yoga teacher and public speaker. She is known for her social activism, impassioned style of teaching, and her raw, honest, and inspired self-expression. In her over 25-year teaching career, Seane has created many instructional DVDs, including her groundbreaking series, The Yoga of Awakening with Sounds True. She's been featured on over 40 magazine covers and countless media outlets, and she has chosen to use her platform to bring awareness to global issues, including social justice, sex trafficking, HIV/AIDS, generational poverty, and animal rights. In 2005, Seane was named the National Yoga Ambassador for Youth AIDS. And in 2013, she received both the Global Green International Environmental Leadership Award and the Humanitarian Award from the Smithsonian Institute. Since 2007, she has been training leaders of activism through her co-founded organization, Off the Mat and Into the World. I know many of you are very familiar and involved with that. And she also co-founded the Global Save a Challenge, which has raised over $3.5 million by activating communities of yoga and wellness to fund in fundraising and awareness raising efforts worldwide. So her first book, Revolution of the Soul, is out right now by Sounds True. And let's talk a little bit about like the core theme of this book, which is so much a part of your Dharma and your life's work. The evolution, the personal evolution is the revolution. So talk a little bit how you came to the concept for this book.
How I came to the concept of the book is, first of all, hi. And to everyone who's watching, thank you for being on this and being a part of it. I can't say that I came up with the concept of the book. It's not that I went into the process with an idea. I assumed that my work would inform itself and eventually it would unfold. So I didn't have a clear-cut intention when I sat down to write. What evolved is the revolution of the soul and the content that is in it, which really does mirror my own work in the world, my commitment to yoga, my commitment to social change, and the way in which I want to support people in activating inside-out change through self-accountability and self-responsibility. So a lot of the book models what that looks like. And so the way that the book is set up, it's 12 chapters. Each chapter has a personal narrative of my own spiritual journey. And at the end of each chapter, there's a secondary part of the chapter, which is me at the age I am now, looking at the story and saying to the reader, here's what was actually happening. Here's what I couldn't have known then. So in the story itself, I'm in present time. So I'm 18 or I'm 24 or I'm 30. And life is just happening. But the hindsight is to be able to say, no, actually, this was yoga. This was trauma. This was the mind-body connection. Here's my first introduction to God. Here are all the angels that showed up. And so the book eventually kind of formed itself. And I got halfway done through the book. It's a chapter on Mona, and who was a teacher of both Ashley and mine, and someone we both cared about very, very deeply. And she will love this chapter, just by the way, if she was here and alive. I finished the chapter with Mona, and I knew I could be done. That part of the book, this is before I had a name for the book, but that part of the book was really about my own personal evolution and one's personal evolution, like snapshots in time of how we grow along the path and the tools in which we use to help for that personal maturation. And I remember thinking like, okay, I'm done. And a part of me was like, you're just chicken shit. You are chicken shit. Because I knew that there was a whole other factor of the book that I didn't want to touch. I didn't want to go near because it was going to require so much risk on my end, so much vulnerability, more than I even put out in the first half of the book, and I put out a lot. And it was going to make the book more progressive, contemporary, and very risky. But the whole entire book is about breaking shame and taking accountability and reframing your narratives and owning truth. And I thought, I have no choice. I have to do this. So the second part of the book is the revolution. And it's looking outward into the world towards service and towards conscious action, and yet still connecting it back to the practices of yoga and really looking at the shadow that exists when we try to go out into the world and help, and the mythology of oneness and what we need to do internally to create, to heal the separation that we participate in because of our own unhealed trauma. And that includes cultural, ancestral, and historical trauma. So it's dealing with power and privilege and racism, and supremacy and saviorism, but not as a separation from our own healing practice, but as a deeper extension of the work that we've already been doing. And so the book fucked me up. It challenged me to my core. It's one of those experiences where I'm not going to say it wrote itself, because I struggled over every single fucking word in that book. It was not this effortless, channeled experience. But what it did, though, was hold a mirror up to my own hypocrisy, recognizing that I'm inviting people within this book to, like I said, break shame and take accountability, when I wasn't willing myself to actually model what that looks like. And so the book forced me to have to go deeper into my own edges and be willing to present my own messy journey, not from when I was 19, not from when I was 25, but now, and be unapologetic about what that looks like and why that's so critical for social change. And that the only thing that I can do is continue to grow, normalize the conversation, make healthier and better choices in the moment of conflict and crisis, and also recognize that I'm hardwired to create harm because of my socialization, upbringing, and inherited trauma, and that you can't change it until you see it. So the evolution is the revolution, and that the only way true change can happen is if a revolution begins from within. And so that was really the process of writing this thing. It was me going into what I called, wormholes of creative despair, and trying to claw myself out of these wormholes to uncover the truth within them, and yet consistently confront my own resistance and the privileges that are within me that allow me to surrender to that resistance and not. So it was cathartic. It was deep. It was raw, brutal at times. Now that I'm on the other side of it, such an incredible gift. I am very proud of what I've done. I know that it's progressive. I know that it's raw. There wasn't a single chapter that I wasn't challenged by. I was in therapy every single week for 4 years, processing the shit out of this thing because of what it was kicking up in terms of my own trauma. Some of the deepest yoga I've ever had to do. It's one thing to write it, but another thing to know that it was going to be up for public consumption was very, very hard for me. As a public figure, as someone who has had to navigate, trying just to navigate my identity in that public sphere, knowing that I was really breaking down some of those identities and having to take responsibility for that. This shit was hard, but I'm done, and I'm grateful that I was blessed enough to get to walk through this process, that I had the support that I had to help me, to guide me through it. And now I get to present it to the world, and whatever happens, happens.
I mean, I just have to say, as a friend who's watched you along the path in this journey, not just writing the book, but before you wrote the book, and all of the deep inner work that you do, that I see, that I witness, that I'm so privileged to be privy to, you know, you don't hold back. I mean, I think anyone that knows you knows that, but you don't fuck around. And I think one of the things that one of the great services that you provided, not just to the yoga world, but to the whole self-development world, is calling people out on their bullshit. You know, you were one of the first people that I saw, you know, over a decade ago, 15 years ago, really naming the shadow, really naming, you know, looking at our own shit, looking at our own spiritual bypassing, how we have to take responsibility and own all of these aspects within ourselves. And then to continue doing this, obviously in your book is no surprise, but it keeps people on their toes. I mean, you're so honest in your process, and you allow the process to keep you so honest that it, you know, it spawns and it galvanizes a whole other level of awakening, of really launching into that next orbit of truth telling.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of people have the courage to do that. You know, it's easy to hide behind platitudes of healing and self-development and my body and wellness.
I don't blame them.
Yeah.
Like, I get it.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
And like I said before, I had to sit with my hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm calling people, I've been calling people in and up for years. And here I was, it was like God was saying, like, really, how much do you mean this? Like,
well, how do you think you were hiding out? Because it doesn't seem to me like you do, but how did you think, like you said, you sort of reached that crossroads where you're like, oh, after the Mona chapter, I got to get even more honest. So what's one example of that?
Well, I think the way I described it is that there was a couple of points, but what I realized about myself, like the kind of the imagery, I thought to myself, I am so transparent. I will share anything, only up to a point. And this was new information for me, that I didn't realize how strategic I have been to curate my narrative to the world, that it was very strategic, not manipulative, just strategic. But once you got to a certain point, Fort Knox, like my privacy, my protection of myself, the walls closed very, very quickly. The book revealed that to me. Like, that took me by surprise, because I would not have thought about that about myself. I was always I'm quick to break shame. I would rather share it before someone else does it and just own it. And Mona really taught us that. But there were certain moments in this book where I was like, can't do it, don't want to do it. Where it really came up was it's an important chapter. It's chapter, I think 7 in the book, maybe. It's when I'm looking for a guru. And it's in the 90s. And at that time, people actually were still like, that was a part of the practice. You had to find a guru. But in my journey, I had been in therapy since I was 18 years old. I had spent countless dollars trying to call my power back. And what I was understanding about the guru-student relationship is you kind of had to give power away. So I had this internal conflict. On one hand, I really wanted someone to tell me how to live my life. But on the other hand, it was incongruent with what I was learning in my therapeutic practices. And so I go to India to find, the guru. And of course, the end result of this chapter is you find the guru within. But before I can get to the punchline, I've got to give examples of it. And I watched myself dancing around what I knew to be a truth that was going to cause conflict, a truth that was going to perhaps put me in the hot seat, a truth that was going to make me, like, I'm aware how, like, my teachers love me. Like, I'm aware of how I'm loved and I'm respected. And I have gratefully rested in that across all different traditions. I've been so blessed. And I knew that if I shared this truth, that I was going to risk some relationships that I value with all my heart. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to suddenly be fodder for gossip or people calling me a liar or gaslighting me. And so without a lot of thought, I'm writing the chapter, dancing around this story that would basically in one story would be able to wrap everything up. And so I gave it a lot of thought, because there's a moment in the teachings of this chapter where I'm sharing about abuse of power. And this is the line: the culture of secrecy that elevates this leadership and doesn't allow, because of their positionality, them to take any responsibility. And when I used the language, the culture of secrecy, I realized that I was participating in that culture of secrecy by not naming this truth, even though I have over the years talked about it, but I never really went in. And I thought, son of a bitch, fuck. And I thought about all the women over the last decade who have come forward to share this story. And in a moment, I'll be more specific. And over the years, I've watched them be ostracized from the community. I watched them get judged. I watched them get called liars. I've watched them lose their jobs. And I would remember reading their accounts of this guru and think to myself, they're not lying. Everyone knows they're not lying. Everyone who I know, for the most part, has affirmed that this behavior was inappropriate. And I realized that I have an obligation to these women because of my positionality, because of my authority, because of the leadership that I'm in, because of my age, because of my access to resources. How dare I let them take the hit? If I came forward with the story, yeah, I'm going to get judged. There's going to be some people who are going to, there's going to be relationships that will crumble. But I'm not going to lose my job. I'm not going to lose my reputation, big picture. I'm not going to lose my resources. With everything that I'm sharing in this book, I have to take the hit so that someone else who doesn't have the same privileges doesn't. And so thus I went in, took a deep breath, and I shared the story. And in the story, it's about Patabi Joyce and about his assists and about the abuse of power that I witnessed firsthand for a really, really long time, where people within the community gave an enormous amount of power over to this man without acknowledging that he was using that environment to be exploitative and hurtful. Now, in the story, I don't condone his behavior, but I also recognize that Patabi Joyce also came from trauma, from a culture of deep suppression. Under those circumstances, his behavior, although it does not make it correct, it does make it almost predictable under the circumstances. The problem is no one was holding him accountable, and everyone was making excuses, saying things like the guru doesn't have the same relationship with the human body that we do. If the guru was doing something that made you uncomfortable, it was because it was a lesson that you needed to learn, blah, blah, blah. And so as someone who I experienced it, I came into that environment having experienced deep childhood sexual trauma. That trauma showed up via dissociation. As an authority in that room, my obligation as a teacher in that position of power is to recognize that everyone who walks into that room has trauma. There's going to be projection, there's going to be transference, there's going to be all sorts of stuff going on as the body releases that trauma. The onus is on me as the person who is holding and facilitating that space to anticipate the trauma, to anticipate the projection and the transference, not to take it personally, and certainly not to exploit it. And what Pattabhi Jois was doing to many, many women was exploiting that vulnerability and taking advantage of that positionality. And so I speak to it. That was one of the many moments in the book where my ego was like, and my identity was like, don't do it. More trouble than it's worth. Let sleeping dogs lie. Who will this help? But the other part of me thought, I can't live with the hypocrisy in my body, sharing about this culture of secrecy, knowing that I'm still complicit to it. Why do I think the world will change unless I change? And that's what the whole book is about. It's turning that mirror back and saying, like, no, it's in me. I create harm. I create separation. I participate in this harm. And the only way for it to change is if I model what that change looks like. And so that's one of the examples of where I protected myself and my truth because of the fear of the repercussions that really was in service to my ego, not to the greater community. And I challenged that within myself, and I'm so glad I did. But it was pretty terrifying, and it's going to be scary when people actually start to read it and hear what I have to say. And, it's literally 2 pages in 250 some odd pages, and yet it will get a lot of attention.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's really the time that we're living in, right? Of really beginning to find our voice as a collective and rise up against these systems, which we have all contributed to. And I really see that as a collective evolution, that we are finally breaking out of that template, collective unconscious of in denial, pretending like, oh, that's just men, or that's whatever, that's fucked up, but not calling it out and taking agency to create the change necessary. Mm-hmm. And that's on all of us. It's collective, men and women.
Yep. All of us. We have participated in this hierarchy, this imbalance of power. And the only way to change it is if we also see our participation in it and stop elevating people into this level of spiritual authority that haven't necessarily earned that right. And so that's what that chapter is about. And it's really about finding the God within. Now, at the same time, though, Pattabhi was still a teacher to me. Again, without condoning his behavior. But what I want to make clear in the, is like, I had to feel all the feelings and all of that, but bigger picture, the gift, even in that awful dysfunction, my go-to, because of my own trauma, was dissociation. Whenever I experienced anything that made me overwhelmed, especially if I felt like there was anything sexual around it, my body would go into freeze. In the book, I share a story how there's a moment where Pattabhi is laying on my back and he's adjusting me. And the adjustment is very inappropriate. For the first time in almost 30 years, or actually it would have been 24 years, because when my childhood trauma started was at 6. So the freeze started at 6. So here I am, 29 or 30 years old. Pattabhi's doing this. Every single time he's done it before, I've dissociated. But this one time, out of nowhere, I reach my hand around and I smack him and I yell for him to stop. The words, that stop or that no had always got locked right here. I could never say it. And it burst out of me so quickly, and I smack him and I say stop. From that point on, never again, when I was confronted with whether it was just on the street harassment or whatever it was, I was able to get past the dissociation and actually find my voice. So even though it was, Pattabhi was not my guru, the teaching I still got from the experience with him is something that I can take ownership for and be proud of. Again, it doesn't condone the behavior, but there was something I still walked away with that was like, I call my power back. And that wouldn't have happened had I not, been in that environment, in that experience. Mm-hmm. And so I still have gratitude although I wish it could have shown up in a different kind of a way. But the whole point of the chapter is that our teachers are everywhere. And that's what spirituality is all about. It's not just in the rainbows and in the crystals. It's in the, it's in the dysfunction. It's in the trauma. It's in the pain and in the suffering. And my point in that is that, and what Mona taught us, is we have to reframe our narratives. We have to flip the story, but not until you feel it. And so Patabi woke me up, but I still didn't feel my rage. It took Mona for me to feel the rage. And then I was able to actually put words, but it went beyond stop. I was actually able to articulate what my boundaries were. But that was the next step in my own evolution.
There's so many things. I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing this story. Thank you for writing it in the book. Thank you for sharing it here, because I think it really normalizes for people. I mean, we become aware in the last couple of years, you know, no surprise, particularly to women, I think, how many people, not just women, but men and women, have been sexually assaulted, you know, survivors, thrivers of very inappropriate behavior across the full range, the full spectrum. And thank you for normalizing that, and that it's so common. And then also reframing it as that taking our power back, that they don't get to hold on to that anymore. We're able to really reinstall that. And that relationship that I see so often, which even yoga is like you saw, it's why we have a whole module on the throat chakra, on mantra, bhakti, and nadi yoga, because when we've had trauma, particularly sexual trauma, but not just, as Mona used to say, it was one of my favorite lines, silence is the conspirator of shame. And when we're not speaking about it and naming it, and it's not that we go and continue telling the story, you know, like people have this sort of shadow perspective of therapy, but being able to name it in an empowered way, reframe the narrative, and speak up and speak our truth, speak our boundaries, as you said, not just know, but actually articulate what's going on. So often that throat chakra is blocked and sealed off, particularly with sexual traumas, but with all traumas. And so I think that is the big piece that we're really seeing as a collective, talking about white supremacy, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, you know. So you know, you just named so much of that, and that example was so vivid of how that can happen and how spontaneously it's like your spirit was growing stronger and stronger until finally it reached that threshold. And in the moment, you're actually able to say, fuck you, you know, back off.
Yeah. Well, we know what's so interesting, though, is that's why the trauma work is so important, because our bodies slide back into, you know, they time travel and into that original sensation when we're in conflict or crisis, in overwhelm, in a split second. And that's where we make our choices from.
Right.
After I wrote this, I sent this story out to many different people to gauge what the feedback was going to be, you know? And for the most part, you know, the people in my life came to me and were just like, you know, we got your back. We know that this was going down. Like, you're not, you know, we got you. But there were a couple who used spiritual bypass in a way that I haven't personally been confronted with, where they literally use the language of the texts to help me to understand that I projected what was within me onto somebody else who didn't deserve it, and gave me evidence of how that projection lived within me. And the letter goes on and on and on and on. And as I'm reading it, I'm reading it on like I'm standing in two worlds. The 52-year-old Seane is like, you got to be fucking kidding me. While simultaneously being aware of the little girl in me that was embarrassed.
Yeah.
That felt that, yeah, he's right. I like, why am I causing trouble? I'm making this up.
Yeah.
It was no big deal. It didn't really happen. All of it is happening in my head. And I had to really sit with that voice, because that voice hasn't been present for me in a very, very long time. And it also hasn't been present in me because when my sexual trauma happened, this was something that was known in the family. It was dealt with. I was never called a liar because I wasn't. It was talked about throughout the whole of my life. And so I was never, as a child, put in that situation to second guess my truth. It was always the truth. So the fact that in my body, I'm going to this shame and this embarrassment and, oh my God, maybe I am making this up. That's cultural.
Yeah.
That's feminine. That's gender. That's something that's so embodied with me. All the women who've been called liars, all the women who've been gaslit, all the women who've been manipulated to believe that they're crazy was coming up in me because the evidence doesn't exist within my own experience of my trauma. And that part is what broke my heart, and I had to sit with. And I responded to this letter. It took me weeks to respond. And I labored over every word. And I did not write that letter just for me. I wrote that letter to every woman in that I know and in the collective who like now as an adult, who has some authority and the ability to like go line by line and say, this is gaslighting. This is spiritual bypass. This is manipulation, and name it, name it, name it. I couldn't be more proud of my response, but I was still at the same time shocked and saddened how quickly I wanted to retreat into shame, because that's the patriarchy has imposed that into our psyche. And that's what keeps women silent, even women like myself who haven't been raised to be silent. In that moment, I wanted to take it all back. Yeah. And that to me was just like, no, this is what the revolution is. It's like, own it, accountability, unapologetic. But how do I invite my students to do that until I can walk that myself and model how uncomfortable it is, how messy it is? And like you said earlier, normalize it. This is spiritual. Everything that what we're talking about right now, this unpacking, with everything that's going on in our world right now, we are all being called up in this huge way to get very sophisticated in what personal and collective healing looks like, and how deep the ancestral trauma lives in us, and how that trauma impacts our ability to connect, our ability to be in relationship with one another. And until we can recognize the ways in which we create harm, then we can't actually, like I said earlier, effect change. And so what I'm trying to say is like, no, we have been navel gazing for too long. We have been evolving our own spirits for a really, not all of us obviously, but many of us have been doing this work. We're being called to a whole other level of it now, and we're ready for this. We've got the tools. We have community. We have resources. Therefore, how dare we not do what has to be done in order to confront the division that's within ourselves, so that we can actually participate in a way that is more meaningful, that is more mindful. And so I wanted to show what that looked like. So there's a whole chapter where I expose my own internalized racism and what that looks like. And because I didn't want to, I did not want to print that chapter. That's chapter 12. That was, I danced around that one, but the same thing, like, then why would I think the world's going to change? How can I not be racist in the culture in which I'm a part of, in what lives in my body? There's no way. It's going to show up when I'm scared, overwhelmed, when the rational part of my brain turns off and the reactive part of my brain gets ignited. I'm not in present time. I'm my grandmother. So of course I'm going to have projections. I'm going to have ideas that are going to stem from these old belief systems that are real in my cellular tissue. And that's the thing I want to talk about these days. Is like, let's name a thing, or homophobia, or genderphobia, or genderism, or ageism, or ableism. Let's name all of our biases and discriminations. Let's just look at them without saying like, oh no, that's not me. Because once we say that, conversation is over. No change can happen. No movement can happen. No revolution can happen. So I've got to love my messy journey. And in loving my messy journey, I can also then love someone else's. I could see that we're all in trauma. Our planet is in trauma. But without tools, hate will meet hate. Violence will meet violence. Fear will meet fear. We've got to be willing to break that particular paradigm by confronting the hate and the fear within ourselves, so that when we're with it, we can ground, breathe, be aware of the natural impulse to create more conflict and make a different choice. And to me, as I write about in the book, that's a revolution worth loving for. Like, that's the work that we have to do in order to move the needle towards peace.
Whew, as always, so articulate. And so who was the person that wrote you that letter? Just kidding.
Nah, not going to go there. Not going to go there. I wish I could say it was the only letter I received, and it wasn't.
No, but I think what you're naming is just the nuance and how baked into this culture, whether it's, genderism, racism, the patriarchy, and that it really comes back to that personal evolution. And each and every one of us standing up for our own personal evolution, but also advocating for others. And so as a teacher,
yeah,
this is something I'd like to, I have a couple more questions, but one, as a teacher or as a clinician, because you're such a facilitator and a teacher, what are some tips for those of us that can really advocate for that can really start to stretch and put ourselves out, whether it's being more transparent ourselves? How do we advocate for that in our students? Because it is so easy, particularly in the yoga world or any kind of self-development, to just, again, slip into these sort of platitudes and like the spiritual bypassing of, and the Instagram effect of yoga, and like, let's just talk about that. And yeah, it's better for you and your nervous system and all that. But like, to really pick up the mantle and make change and call people to rise up, what are your like 2 or 3 biggest tips for teachers and clinicians and how they can stake a claim?
Get into therapy.
Yeah.
Do the deep inner work and confront your own fragility and shame around some of these more challenging topics. Seek out leaders and mentorships who live on the margins, who actually have experienced the kind of bias, prejudice, and discrimination. Learn from them. Try to understand more about cultures that you're not necessarily familiar with or a part of. Be willing to do workshops with leaders on the margins who can help you to navigate your own internalized isms and biases and privilege without shame. Michelle Johnson is the first one that pops into my head. She wrote a book called Skill in Action. That's an excellent, excellent resource. There are many, though, leaders who are out there that are educating and based on their own experience and their own skill. And also, like, be careful not to move too quickly. That's a mistake I've made, and learn how to take it on the chin. If you fuck up, own it. And you will mess up. If you're doing this right, you will mess up. But own it. Look at it, be willing to eat the humble pie, feel all the feelings of discomfort, and show up anyway. I can only speak as a white woman of privilege. My privilege tells me that I don't have to do this work. My life is fine. Students are going to come. I'm going to make a living. Like, I don't need the extra anxiety of doing doing justice work.
Yeah.
But that's my privilege. And if I don't dismantle that, then I'm the problem. I'm why change doesn't happen. And so I invite teachers just to really look at are they willing to be in the hot seat? Are they willing to look past their own privilege and really unpack this idea of oneness? What does that mean? And how sophisticated are they willing to go in order to hold the seat of the teacher? And it evolves. I couldn't have done this work 25 years ago. I wouldn't even say Om in a classroom, let alone Namaste. It's like I could just getting through a class was enough. And then my nervous system got used to it. And then I started to Om. Then my nervous system got used to that. Then I started to pray. So, you know, I titrated in so many ways, you know, until my own trauma and my own limiting beliefs could accommodate. So where I'm at today in my development as a student and as a teacher, I can handle the discomfort because of all the steps I've taken along the way to put me in this position. So what I recommend to teachers is do the work to prep you, to open yourself up, to going deeper into these conversations, because these conversations, it's the dialogue that actually changes the world, not just the individual experience, but the collective paradigm. And I think to earn the right as a teacher, we have to keep going towards our shadow. And especially for those of us with privilege, and really looking deeper into what it represents, what it means. Like what does it mean to let go of my privilege? It comes down to survival, you know, like those are core issues. If I let go of my privilege, my nervous system says that I'm not going to eat, then I'm not going to be safe. Who's going to take care of me? Now, intellectually, I know that all that's fine, but on a core level, my attachment to those privileges is big. You take away my privilege, I don't know what's there. Even though, you know, I know I'm fine. That's core. So I got to sit with that fear. That's not present time fear. That's every woman who has been marginalized in my family growing up. That's every Jew that was destroyed. Like that's old trauma. That's a belief system that I have to say like, oh, that's why I'm so attached to my privilege. Well, that makes sense. Let me sit with that grief. Let me sit with that anxiety and ask myself, is it actually true? My body says it's true, but my consciousness knows, nope, let go of that attachment and you'll experience liberation, true liberation. But you can't get there until you first sit with like, oh, there's an actual real fear that exists, you know, within the construct of whiteness. But I don't want to participate in it and I don't want to perpetuate it. So I got to really look at it. Mm-hmm. So I hope that teachers who have any authority with everything that's going in the world, like with everything that's going on in the world right now, use this opportunity well. Like use the time where people are paying attention to you to plant seeds for real transformational change. Going past just like, I forgive my mother, I forgive my boyfriend. Like that's all good, but let's go even further. Let's forgive ourselves for thinking we should know better and then get to work. And my hope for leaders in this community is they see that there's this incredible sea change that's been happening in the last few years, and that spiritual bypass and hiding behind the language of the texts, especially the patriarchal language of the text, it's archaic, it's floundering, and we need to be radical in our commitment to expand what yoga is past the way in which it's been unpacked for us based on these mostly male teachers, and go even deeper and see the level of teaching that yoga is inviting us to go towards that will bring us into unity. And it includes looking at our internalized racism and all the other isms that I mentioned. You're muted still.
Sorry, of course you're such an advocate for this, and you have created so many resources for everyone with your off the mat and into the world training. You have your listen and learn, legacy tours. And when is your next listen and learn? Tell everyone a little bit about that, because that's such a great resource.
Yeah.
Coming up this fall, yeah?
Learning and listening tour, we're going to Alabama. It's called Race in America. It happens, I think, at the very, very end of October, around like the 28th, I think. It's a 5-day trip. And now this is something that Nikki Myers and I lead. We host it, but we're really managing the yoga part, the mind-body connection, and looking at the ways in which we internalize the trauma and processing what comes up for us in this experience. Over those 5 days, we're really working with Black leadership, educators, historians, artists who are going to come in and help us to understand race in America, from slavery to civil rights to the progressive movements of the day. We'll be working with the Equal Justice Initiative to really understand that trajectory, and also our part in it for those of us who are part of the white culture, and really looking at the ways in which our own biases show up in our life today. And we'll also be working, though, with an organization that were ex-white supremacists, ex-neo-Nazis, who teach us about what white supremacy is, how it's showing up governmentally, how it shows up within the construct of whiteness, and whiteness as a cultural sickness. But again, whiteness is a construct. That's fascinating and really, really challenging. But we're looking at it from all the different lenses. And so I highly recommend, there's only 6 spots left on that particular trip. But I really recommend that if you can do it, do it. It is life-changing. It rocked my world. And it's something that Nikki and I like to do because we're there to hold the yoga space, but we're also there learning, just like everybody else. I'm certainly not an authority on talking about race in America, nor should I be. But I can talk about whiteness in America. I can talk about complicity in our whiteness and in our racism. But so to have the opportunity to learn from these leaders it's one of my favorite tours and favorite part of the work I do.
Yeah, I can't wait to come on that, whether it's one or the next one, but I just think it's such an amazing resource. And then the last thing I want to talk about is we have to give a little shout out to our dear teacher Mona Miller. So luckily, you introduced me to Mona many, many years ago, which was such a lifesaver. And she was our unconventional therapist, spiritual teacher. But, you know, for me, she really taught me, I think the biggest thing and the most empowering tool was how to shatter shame, as one of my students calls it, and really own those pieces and reclaim our power by owning those pieces of ourselves that are so difficult to look at and deal with and are usually running the show. How did you find Mona? And then tell us sort of what maybe one of your biggest takeaways from her was.
I write a whole chapter. I can't wait for you to read the chapter on Mona because, and everyone who's read it who knows Mona, I have reflected that I just like,
you nailed it.
That I really describe her. Yeah, I kind of nailed it. And I'm very proud of it. And I know she would love it. Because it talks about the first time that I meet Mona and how she freaked the living fuck out of me at first, because I had spent years in yoga learning how to admit my feelings. But I had also been learning tools. Like in yoga, we're taught detach. Big feelings come up, you detach. What Mona was trying to make me understand is that that detachment without awareness is dissociation. And so I had just been given one more spiritual tool to actually avoid my big feelings. And in my first session with Mona, I realized like, oh my God, she was actually going to make me feel them. And like literally, not talk about them, but actually embody them. And she freaked me out. And I share in the book, it's after the Patabi Joyce story. It's after I come back from India. And you know the story very, very well, but I go through a really unexpected and very brutal breakup that suddenly my yoga is not working. I'm going to sleep crying. I'm waking up crying. Getting on the mat. I just want to crawl into a fetal position. And I'm bereft. Even though intellectually I know that the breakup was appropriate, but the betrayal and all the things that went along with it was so overwhelming to me that I was starting to fall into old unhealthy patterns. And I don't mean like drugs and alcohol. In the book I share around obsessive compulsive disorder and cutting. And things like that started to happen again. I started to see the impulse I didn't use drugs. I didn't use alcohol, but I would find other ways to self-regulate. So my friend, Marty, you know Marty Payes, she calls me up one morning and I'm sobbing. And she's like, oh, Shawnee, she's like, you need to see Mona. And I remember Marty saying to me, she's like, you'll love her. She's great. She's like a sister. She's a little quirky, but she'll get to the truth. And I remember hearing the word quirky, thinking like, well, what does that mean? And then, so I leave Mona a message. And maybe an hour later, the phone rings. I pick it up, and it's Mona in her high-pitched voice. And I pick up the phone, hello, and she's like, Shawnee. And I was like, who is this? And she's like, it's Mona. And in that moment, she says, tell me, baby, what's going on? And I start to talk about the breakup and how sad I was. And she's going, that motherfucker. And what a piece of shit. And I'm thinking to myself, like, on one hand, I love that she was like rallying with me. And at the other side, I'm thinking, well, that's kind of weird for a therapist to like be kind of like engaging the judgment. But I liked it. And I thought it was weird. So she said, she's like, sweetheart, get in your car, come over. We got to rinse this shit from you. And so that very day, I found myself in my car going to Mona's house, and it was around Halloween. And as you know, Mona was obsessed with decorations. So the house is covered in ghosts, goblins, bats, witches, animated screaming goblins that popped out at you. And I was like, what the fuck is this? And, as I get to the door, there's all this screaming. I come in and her son comes out and says hi, and there's still screaming going on in the house. And it takes me a moment to realize, though, that the screaming was this: fuck you, motherfucker, cock-sucking cunt. Like they were real people swearing and screaming in the house. It wasn't coming from the decorations. And I was like, this is a madhouse. And only to find out later that Mona would have people in the house doing anger work and processing their shit. And that confronting, not going spiritual. You had to use whatever language you wanted in whatever way you wanted just to move the energy before you can get to the truth that was underneath the rage or the fear or the shame, which was always grief. But it took a process to get to the grief. And I remember going up the stairs and I start dissociating right away because my nervous system was like, I had a feeling what was going to be asked of me, and I was already checking out. And Mona sits me down and she turns to me and she's like, so tell me what's going on, oh vibeless one. And named it right away. Yeah, that's what she used to call me. She called me oh vibeless one and guru, very sarcastically. And vibeless one because I dissociated. And she picked it up immediately that I was in shutdown out of self-protection. And so she gets some girl from a closet to come out and show me what anger work looks like. I'm like in the midst of an absolute panic attack. And yet in that one session, Mona, I'll let the book tell the story because I think I'm there because of my breakup. But Mona figures it out immediately that my breakup was not while I was there. That I didn't even know this guy long enough to feel the pain in which I was feeling, that it was historical. And we had to go there before I could even begin to have it. I remember her saying to me, one day you'll thank him. Not yet. She goes, right now your life is a shit show. So we got to rinse that. She goes, but one day you will have so much gratitude. You won't want to change a moment of this. And she's right. And in that very first session is when I was able to touch forgiveness. And I don't mean for my ex, my childhood trauma. It was the first time I was able to actually get the rage out of me and get a glimpse of what could be on the other side. Mona was the turning point. And it was the antithesis to everything that I was learning in yoga. I was learning breathe and everything changes. And Mona was like, well, that's an interesting tool, but how about let's get to the core of what you need to change? And I'm like, huh? What? So that's what I describe in this story. And more. And I know that if Mona was alive today, she would love every part of it, because it really, that motherfucking woman was quirky and weird and powerful and more spiritual than really any saint or sage that I've met along the way. And I feel personally so blessed that I got to work so closely with her for 11 years of my life. I would not be the woman I am, or the teacher I am, or the student I am, had it not been for her guidance.
And, you know, just so much wisdom in there. And that's what always blew me away. And she always had such a kind of, you know, not disdain, but she was, you know, healthily critical of the self-development yoga world and our spiritual bypassing tendencies. And that vibe-less one association, and such a brilliant, articulate, accessible understanding of the mind-body connection and how our emotions and, you know, old historical core wounds are compounded in our system, and how we can release that. And I think those tools, that tool of rinsing that she, as she called it, it's one of the most effective tools, whether it's journaling, writing, but there's no substitute for the anger work and actually literally purging it out of your body.
Nope.
Yeah.
I mean, people who are watching, you could still get Mona's books online, the Invisible Warfare and the workbook that goes along with it. I'm sure her partner Bernie would be more than happy to send you. I'm sure they got a shit ton of copies left. But those books, those are still some of my go-tos when I need to hear her wisdom. You know, that's what I like to pick up.
I can't wait to read that chapter. And so anything else you want to share with everyone? Revolution of the Soul is out now. Pick it up, buy a copy, check out, we'll have all the links right below. But check out John's book tour, because she's coming all around the country, and definitely go to one of her events. Please,
my book tour, I'm going to be, like I said, or I don't know if I said it, but 30 cities in 42 days. And odds are I'm going to be in a city somewhere near you guys. So please come, bring me like a smoothie and just like fluff up my hair, because I'm sure I'm going to be a mess after the first 3 weeks. And it would be my joy to be able to share this process with you all and to read some of the book. And also, if they go to revolutionofthesoulbook.com for free, they can get 7 videos or teaching videos from the book of mine. They can also download the first chapter for free if they want to get a little taste of what it's all about. If they go to my website, SeaneCorn.com, I did this little gift, and it's going to be available to anyone. And this is just kind of like my thank you to the community. You can download for free a 60-minute yoga class that's from one of my DVDs. But I've also am releasing the transcript that goes along with that, plus the sequence that's hand drawn by me. The transcript has the meditations and the prayers that I do in that sequence. And it's my hope that for people, especially teachers, that they feel comfortable using my words in their own classes around prayer or meditation. I've always felt like those words come very easily to me, and prayers should never be coveted, only shared. And it's something that people would ask of me often, or tell me that they sit in front of my programs and they write out all the words that I say in the prayers. And I'm like, why? I got them. I've got like pages and pages of prayers. So I made them available. So if people want them, all they have to do is go to my site, and there should be an opt-in that gives you a link that gets you all that stuff. So that's my little thank you. I'm going to keep that up for a while, just because.
Oh, that is so generous. And it's such a gift and talent that you do have of just channeling spirit, and the way that it pours through you is just divinely articulate and eloquent. And anyone who's been a part of any of your classes has definitely experienced that. So there's a pure transmission that comes through, and it is a talent. And thank you for sharing that. What a great resource.
Thank you. So that's how they can find me, SeaneCorn.com, offthenatiintotheworld.org. If they want to know more about the leadership trainings around yoga, transformational work, social justice, and action. and revolutionofthesoulbook.com. Please order the book like immediately. I'm also going to be offering for book clubs. I'm putting together a discussion guide to help people kind of process. I'm actually going to, that's getting finished like right now, actually, after you and I hang up, and that's going to be out there very shortly, because I really want people to be able to unpack this responsibly, and also challenge themselves in some of the inquiry that they may have.
So awesome. Yay. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone who heard it, buy the book. This is definitely not your typical yoga book. This is true transformation, piercing the veil, clear truth. So check it out. Thank you so much, Seane, for just being who you are and being such a trailblazer and pioneer for so many of us to follow.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. I love you with all my heart. Always. Always. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.